think to me where they were best, in
games.
Yes.
Video games.
Yes. A video game?
There was a
Critical Cast Episode 2, and the theme is expression. Not just expression in game design, but expression in any artistic medium. Brainy Gamer.
Hey, Richard. How you doing, man?
And here was my message. You want to create videos, express, and present your structure, form, and always think when it's to communicate ideas that is gameplay challenge.
Really, should have been more of a lesson of what's possible. It's really just what's possible. What's possible.
And that is it for the second episode of Critical Cast. Hey everybody, this is the Crazy Kirby Kid, and I just wanted to say that the original goal of the Critical Cast podcasts was to be able to respond quickly to the media that I consume on a weekly basis. And while I plan many articles, weeks and sometimes years in advance, I wanted to have an outlet that responds quickly to the current issues, including the articles, videos, and comments from all around the video game discourse. I noticed something about my style of production. No matter the medium, I can't help but include and acknowledge the discourse of voices, data, comments, and opinions on the current topic. Remember the Good Game web series I have on my YouTube channel? Or just about half of the articles I write incorporate quotes from outside sources. And one of the reasons why I decided to make these podcasts in the first place is so that you can hear the same voices that I hear. That maybe you'll pick up on something behind the words. And with that in mind, this is the digital B-side to the Critical Cast podcast. It's a space that's a little less produced and a little more open to your inputs as I extend the conversation from the main episodes of Critical Casts. After listening to a new episode, if you want to contribute, be sure to send me a comment or jump into the Google Hangouts that I'll host to be a part of these B-side episodes. The following is carefully edited for clarity. Welcome to the B-side of Critical Cast Episode 2, Expression.
Squeak on the cassette. The tape was kind of the last format that we had where you didn't really skip through it. Like you threw it on and you listened to it. I think because of that fact, it put a little bit more of an emphasis on making a solid album from front to back.
What is it about the cassette that won't die? It is obsolete, clunky, its sound is unpolished, atmospheric, and flat. But the blank cassette enticed us with its possibilities, and it was portable, so we could take it anywhere, record anything. And maybe it's because of this freedom, or maybe because of nostalgia, but the cassette has quietly begun its comeback.
The format is pretty simple. We listen to a couple of clips and hear what we have to say about them. And in this particular episode, my brother will be joining us along with two other guests, and here they are.
So my name is Corvus Elrod. I'm 45 years old. I live in Portland, Oregon. I have been an avid gamer since I bought my first computer game, Zork, back in the 80-somethings, and I've been playing games pretty compulsively since then. I'm also big into doing tabletop role-playing games and have recently released my own tabletop storytelling platform called Baloy Dam. I consider myself a semionaut. I believe that game mechanics communicate meaning, and so much of my focus on game design professionally has to do with how do game mechanics produce meaning in the audience. We'll all be located at Zakelro, ZAKELRO.com.
Okay, my name is Jose Gonzalez. I'm 28 years old. I'm from San Juan, Puerto Rico. I guess my gaming background, it's almost hard for me to identify a beginning to it because I was I guess, lucky enough to be born into a household where my father already had a working ColecoVision with Donkey Kong, and that was pretty much my introduction to video games. I don't remember ever not playing them, and so I've been interested in video games ever since.
The next thing you'll hear is a series of audio clips, and we're going to go back and forth between playing the audio clips and talking about them, but it's all going to be pretty seamless. So just hang on and keep your ears open because it all has to do with the theme of expression.
Hey, I'm Grumps. I'm not so Grump, and we're the Game Grumps.
And there it was. Kirby had finally met the tuba of the Lost City.
Can you move so I can so I can get to you?
Yeah, I'm gonna move.
Can you move so I can get to you?
May I blow this tuba?
You need to stop being a complete fool? You need to stop being a complete fool?
Yeah.
And ask me the question that you're gonna ask
I
me.
got to wait till we're done with Rainbow Tube segments.
Alright.
Okay. This is a beautiful game, really, because
Kirby likes eating.
You know, I have to admit, it's pretty poorly designed in a lot of aspects.
Why is that?
Because a lot of the time, it's just like, okay, now you get an item that you can't lose with. You just walk and you win. Like you get the big sword, and it's like, now you can kill everybody. You get the tuba, and it's like, you're invincible, Kirby, yeah!
That's a very common criticism of Kirby in general.
Yeah, Kirby games have always been...
It's never been hard, really.
Yeah.
That's a common struggle within the industry. This idea that a game should be difficult or challenging or hard. And platformers, of course, are traditionally brutally difficult and punishing because they came from an arcade realm where the entire point of the game was to get you to feed coins into the machine, quarters into the machine over and over and over. But I find it interesting that there's a huge market for games that provide the experience without providing that brutal difficulty. And a lot of sort of core gamers tend to be really dismissive and derogatory of that style of design.
Yeah, in a sense, Kirby was one of the first to actually profit from that kind of lack of difficulty, in a sense, because by its very nature, a platformer, the traditional obstacle is falling down from the platforms, and in Kirby, you could always fly. For as long as you wanted, and very few levels actually have any danger whatsoever in the sky. It's not like you're balancing risk versus reward, whether it's easier for you to go flying or not. In many Kirby games, you can just fly, and I do remember a lot of people criticizing even the earliest Kirby games and even Superstar because you could. They would essentially try to prove a point by flying through the entire stage and say, hey, you see, it's not difficult. And, the classic response to that was, well, but the game is meant to be enjoyed on the ground as well. But yeah, there's a big connection there traditionally in the gaming mind between difficulty and enjoyment for some reason.
Then I would ask what your definition of bad design is.
Well, I think that
because I agree, but I don't. I don't think it's a fact.
It's well, nothing is. It's fun, so I forgive it. It's still fun.
Well, it's empowering. So
yeah, okay, but no, okay. Hear me out on this then.
No, I don't. I guess for the audience, because I totally agree with you.
No, it is empowering, right? Okay, but empowering.
But I wouldn't say that it's bad design.
Okay, I'll explain. Okay, so right now it's empowering to do this, right?
Yeah.
But all I did to get this was just walk to where I was supposed to go and get it. It's not like I fucking toiled and then I got an item that has a short duration. It's just I can do it all the time, and that's just what I do.
Yeah.
And it's, just because it's Kirby and Nintendo knows how to do it, it's still fun.
I agree, yeah.
But it could have been so much more.
I agree with all of what you're saying.
So we really do agree on game design when it matters, I think.
No, not when it matters.
I think you do.
No.
What do you mean?
Okay, well, I mean, matters is also, what's the word I'm thinking of? It's a personal thing. Thinking something matters is still an opinion, because of what matters to me doesn't necessarily matter to you, and vice versa. Like the discussion we had earlier about World of Warcraft.
Yeah, I guess.
The stuff that matters to me doesn't.
I don't think
matter
either
to
of us is right or wrong. It's just different.
No, I agree. There's nothing right or wrong.
But we still agree on some games. And we agree for the same reasons. You're gonna get hit by that void. I love how I can't oh, fuck. I like how I can't ask my question.
And also I want to call attention to not necessarily the conclusions that they draw about game design, but how they go about talking about it. And I think I sense a little bit of frustration and miscommunication between the two. They're trying to resolve the issue of what's meaningful, and then they try to sort out how much difficulty means to them in terms of how they enjoy game design.
This is a great game. I love it. It's just fun. Like, you can't analyze it. It's a Kirby game.
You can analyze anything.
You and Barry, you should analyze everything. I get it, I know! I just mean there's no point in, like, trying to analyze something that's supposed to be fun.
There is. Why not? There's more reason to analyze it. If it's supposed to be
okay,
fun
I get what you're saying.
Like, it's fun. You should try to figure out why.
I know. Okay, I think there's some value in sometimes just letting yourself be able to enjoy something.
Absolutely, but
that's all I'm saying. Yeah, of course we can analyze it till all fucking day. But what we should remember when you were a kid, you just had fun with it. That's what this game is for. It's to remind you what it's like to be a fucking kid. You don't gotta analyze everything.
All right, I get that, but why?
Why what?
It's not like it just happened.
Because
People
sometimes
planned it.
Because sometimes life can just be fun.
I get it. But somebody made this game. A team of people made this game. They slaved over it, and they did things on purpose.
I know you can analyze it. You can analyze anything. What I'm saying is I think this game is meant to not be thought too much about.
I think all games are like that.
Not all.
You'd have to be pretty pretentious if you made a game specifically to be analyzed.
Oh, okay. Like Facade.
Okay. He was trying so hard. I love it.
But has anybody else had that kind of argument with somebody before?
I think that's, in general, that's very often how the word fun is used in video game discussions. It's almost the conversation ender. Sort of like, for example, they release maybe a new Mario Kart for Wii U next year or something, and maybe it's exactly the same Mario Kart that we're used to, except like cheaper with more blue shells and more, and less balance and all those things. And I often find that in that type of discussion, when it's a very storied series, if I criticize it with certain friends, the conversation usually ends with, "Oh, come on, but it's fun." It's fun. The exact same thing with games that you don't quite want to play, such as Deer, Esler maybe, or maybe the same thing happened to me with No More Heroes, or Dark Souls, or games like that, where you would be saying positive things about the game, and they'll say, but the game is just not fun to me. I mean, what's the point then? So it cuts both ways in a way. It's used to criticize games without having to explain yourself, and also to kind of in a conformist kind of vibe to just accept the fact that maybe the game isn't the ideal, but I enjoy playing it and stop talking to me about its negative points, that sort of thing.
To me, that particular argument comes down to there are people who just want to flat out consume media, and I've had this argument a lot about movies and television shows because I really analyze narrative in whatever form, and I really engage with it. And part of my engagement with media is sort of dissecting it and analyzing it and figuring out why it works or why it doesn't work. And so that sort of critical thought is a huge part of my personal fun whenever I'm playing a game. And so, but there are people who, for them, that feels like work. And so they want to shut that part of the conversation down because they don't want to have to engage their brain that way. So to me, video games really lead themselves to those more in-depth, engaged discussions because, of course, they are more engaging media. They engage you on multiple levels. They engage you physically, mentally, emotionally, potentially. And yeah, I'm always very puzzled by people who want to say, nope, it's just fun, or it's just this, or it's just that, and therefore it doesn't deserve to be thought about. Yeah, people say that about kids' movies all the time. Corvus, it's just a kids' movie. Who cares? Well, we're feeding this media to our children.
To our future generation.
rich and deep and meaningful, more so because they're kids, their brains are growing.
I think I hear in the back of John's voice whenever he talks about fun and trying to dismiss the issue of analyzing the design of Kirby, there's sort of this fear inside of it. Like if they begin to talk about the game in a particular level, in a detailed level, and really going into the design of it, that there'd be something magical about how he enjoys the experience that would be lost. Wow. And I love the contrast between him and Aaron, because Aaron, as you may or may not know, is the guy who did the Sequelitis videos. And those videos have millions of views on YouTube, and he did a video on Mega Man X and the Castlevania NES games. And he really looked at a lot of details in that video, and a lot of people enjoyed his videos for that. And you contrast that with John, who likes to talk about feelings and story and more like how he's affected emotionally, versus this other guy who does things in a detailed, analytic way. And you can definitely tell there's tension in this part of the conversation.
Yeah, this game's just enticing. It makes you feel good. You're like, I'm getting out of here!
Sure enough, fucking Boulder! Boulder Dash! Why is it this game that brings out the analysts in all of us?
The what?
The analysts.
What?
We've only been talking about game design like this entire time.
Yeah, weird, right? Well, because you know what I think it is?
What's that?
Because this game's fun and it shouldn't be, and we know it. But it's still fun. So obviously, game design is not cut and dry. There's a lot of factors that go into it.
Oh, no. I could define why. At least I could try to describe
too.
Why.
Like, you always make me sound like an asshole, I swear. I know you can. I can define tons of things about it. But at its core, this game almost seems too simple to be fun, but we're still having fun.
It's the same way throwing a ball to each other is fun.
Yeah, it is, but it's still fun. I think there's something indefinable. Okay, you can define stuff all you want, all day long, right? There's still something indefinable about stuff like this and movies you like and games that you like. There's always just an indefinable factor that makes the difference between you really loving something and not.
Yeah.
And I just think it's cool that you can't always define it. Part of it's just having a good time with friends too.
Yeah, definitely. It's the same way people defend the new Mario Brothers when we shit on it.
I suppose.
It's like,
I mean, that game is fun. I still prefer this. Next time on Game Grumps! Hey, don't you out and see us be happy?
No.
Well, now we are.
No.
No what?
No.
No what?
No.
Oh my god, Aaron, do you see that dinosaur?
The same guy who appeared or seemed to be afraid of analyzing things comes back with these particular comments about how there's so much that is indefinable about the experience of playing these games and what he likes about it. And he also made a curious comment about simplicity. And he said that this game is so simple it shouldn't be fun, but it is. And I know in my blog I've talked about how people have built up sort of a negative perception on simplicity, and they demand in their stories to be complex and demand everything that be deep, quote unquote, and complex. And somehow simple things don't have anything to offer or anything to say. And you can hear a lot of that in John's response.
Well, I think that Kirby, it's interesting because Kirby really isn't that simple. It's easy, but there's tons of things going on there. I mean, in Kirby, you're always changing your... I mean, the hardest part of playing a second player, I haven't played that that particular game. The Superstar I played is the Super Nintendo version. Mm-hmm. But I remember one of the hardest things for me, usually when I played second player, was keeping my character, because you could change into so many different characters that it was always tempting to keep switching up and keep doing more and more things, and oftentimes I regretted those decisions. I mean, simply because it was more fun to play as one power versus the other. And there's generally so many different things to do in those games that I don't think they're simple per se. I mean, I think they're very over the top, if anything. I mean, just like the music, but they're easy, and you could say many things about that. But I don't necessarily tie that to simplicity.
Yeah, I think that's a really valid point. I also think this still comes down to this notion that this sort of not wanting to. And there's a lot of assumptions about gameplay again in there, right? Like it's so simple it shouldn't be worth talking about. It's a weird assumption.
Or simple things that we understand inherently, and there's nothing else to say about it.
Right. So I find that interesting, but I also that indefinable something that he refers to, that mystery thing. People don't tend to acknowledge that their own history with a medium or just their own personal history in life really dramatically informs the way in which they consume things and the way in which they interact with things. So, I mean, that indefinable something that makes Kirby so enjoyable for them is just their own history with the medium of games. I've never liked side-scrollers. I was a PC gamer. That's how I cut my teeth, because consoles came about when I was a bit older, and when it came time to spend my own money on an electronic device, I bought a computer. And so I don't have that attachment to the medium, so Kirby to me isn't enjoyable. Like, I've tried Kirby games and I'm like, yeah, okay, whatever, and I pass on them. I don't have the sort of joy they're both clearly having playing, even as they sort of talk about how simple it is. And that's what that indefinable something about the game is. It's an indefinable something about the player, in my opinion.
And I think there's one other thing that's interesting about these clips that I wanted to point out is that, as you were starting to point out, Corvus, John conflates, or you too, Jose, John conflates simplicity with ease or difficulty. And then he conflates analyzing games and looking at a deeper level with just coming to terms with his own observations and feelings. And it's like everything about the experience of playing Kirby is tangled up in one ball. And he's afraid to pull apart any part of it would unravel the whole thing. So he'd rather just leave it as it is, an untouchable, magical, experiential essence, instead of even looking at it from different angles. And that idea plays into a lot of what I talked about in episode 2 of Critical Cast, where when you can't break things down, it all gets lumped together in one sort of tangled ball of feelings. And that's exactly what you can hear. You can hear it in his voice, especially in the way he talks.
Allegedly don't like to read, right? In the same way that some people who, I guess, came from the pre-video game era don't like to play video games. And in a sense, they could both just say they're not interested in it, but when you think about it, they're both ways of expressing yourself that require a lot of work to consume, right? I can't do laundry and read a book at the same time. I can watch a movie, right, and fall asleep when the movie ends, and it doesn't need my input, right? It doesn't need my two eyes going from left to right and then manually changing the page and actively moving the story forward in the same way that a video game needs active input, otherwise it stops moving, right? Unlike music or film, which is, probably the two most popular forms of expression, most actively consumed forms of expression, that require a lot less work to consume in a way, right? Mm-hmm. You can perfectly enjoy music without taking the time to analyze it. I mean, if you love music, you will, but you can just listen to the radio and feel like you're consuming things. And I guess in a sense, that's the hard part about video games to penetrate. In the same way that I guess for many kids, it's hard to begin developing a love for reading, because you need to take that leap of faith and work at it a little bit.
Very true.
And reading requires a more complex mental engagement, translating text into mental images and an understanding of how things are happening. Movies, relationships between physical objects and movies are very clear, because there they are, you see them. But in a book, you have to sort of imagine it and construct the reality, because books take longer, typically, to consume than movies. You have to sort of hold the idea of the plot in your head longer. You have to have a deeper understanding of, so it's a much more intellectually complex process. It requires a higher baseline than movies do. You can do the same thing with movies, it's just they don't require you to. Yeah, good point.
Exactly.
T-minus 10, 9, 8, 7, 6, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1, 0.
Weekend confirmed.
Ignition. Liftoff.
Okay, that I really want to know about. But before we leave this, here's the thing. As high as people are, as up as we are on this, and we're going to have... I need to think about, and I would love to get those listeners' feedback on how we should do weekend... Like, Shaq has an established protocol for doing Game of the Year. It's pretty well set as far as voting and all that kind of stuff. But we can confirm, like, we can do what we want to. So here's the short version that we can tackle later. And then we can tackle on another show. Is that one of the challenges I think that all awards show face for video games is that they're so tied to this whole best of mentality, and video game has become such a broad swath of catch-all that it creates these ridiculous setups where we're trying to justify how Journey, The Walking Dead, and Assassin's Creed 3 are all up for quote-unquote Game of the Year. And it's just an absurd... It's an absurd categorization. And I don't have the answer yet.
Yep. All right, so that's Garnett Lee talking. And he's talking about Game of the Year. And he introduces his topic by saying it's sort of fundamentally ridiculous to compare these very different types of video game products. And he used The Walking Dead, Journey, and I think some more gamey game example. Assassin's Creed. And I've been listening to Garnett's podcast for about 6 years, 5-6 years, and every year about this time he talks about Game of the Year, and he's really been struggling with this topic for, like I said, for many years, and he always gets stuck on these same points, and I think it says something very specific about expression and how people work things out through language or a lack thereof. And one thing he initially said was, these products are very different from each other. How can we even begin to compare them? And as we know, or I think we know, when you break things down into parts, it's a lot easier to create a criteria that allows you to compare different things.
Oh, I think he suffers from the same problem that JonTron does in the previous video, Mr. Indefinable Quality. He wants to respect every game's quote-unquote indefinable quality. So if you're comparing indefinable qualities, that's where he finds the absurd in categorizing Journey, Assassin's Creed 3, and Walking Dead. But I guess this is the same problem. If you find the correct category, if you find a commonality that you find suitable enough to compare them, that he's just lacking the framework in his mind. I guess it's just the same problem that JonTron was facing in the previous video.
I find, in particular, really complex mediums it's nearly impossible to be able to just sort of assess with a wave of your hand comparative quality. They're practical. They're almost like they are. They're the big ones in particular are popularity contests. And the judges are easily swayed by a certain amount of spectacle. There are formulas for things like, best motion picture. I completely avoid video game award shows. I pay zero attention. Bizarre assumptions in the video game industry in the first place that I can't imagine the award shows for video games have any sort of adherence to acceptable standards.
What about things like the how high do you go? What do you think about the Pulitzer or Nobel Prize or any other of those prizes awarded to other types of things? So
those types of awards they're not award shows. So for one thing,
right. Okay.
That's a completely different class of
award shows. All right.
Yeah. So awards I'm fine with. If you want to recognize and reward someone for good work done, you've got a certain amount of limited resources in which to reward them, that's fine. I actually even think a lot of literary awards that focus on a particular genre are probably pretty valid. To some degree, although I know some genres are muddled popularity fests as well. But when you get to something as sweeping as movies or video games, or even music award shows, it's all such a subjective assessment of quality and value that I find it just impossible to engage with and take even remotely seriously.
So you think it's too diverse, basically? The medium in general is too...
I think that the mediums are too diverse and too commercial.
Okay.
And I think that's probably my biggest complaint about music award shows, movie award shows, and now video game award shows, is that it's really about market value on some level. To be able to say that you worked on something that got an award means you can ask for more money on your next project, allegedly. I mean, that's kind of the correlation. So it's not just recognizing good work. It's become this commercial stepping stone, this corporate stepping stone, and it makes it highly suspect that it's an actual assessment of any sort of quality.
All right, so let's hear what the next few clips have to say about these topics that we raised.
I have an idea.
I
just thought of it.
Yes.
We picked the top, and I pick we because I'm a part of this.
You are.
Top 20 games, or I just any number, user submitted, and for each game,
Put them in a hat.
For each game, we pick what they're best at, not picking one, which is best multiplayer, which is best game. We just tell each one what they're great at. It's like
every child's a winner.
It's like preschool. It's preschool judging.
I like the Game of the Year raffle idea better. Like you put them all in a hat, and you're like,
I think preschool judging has merit.
But okay, you know how you solve this problem? Seriously,
I'm trying to grasp that because here's
how you solve
that was serious.
The rest of the problem is that no matter how you try to take this broad section called video games and cut it up, you only make things worse by fragmenting it. If you do it by platform, then you wind up with these weird situations where you're like, well, this is a multi-platform game.
Yeah,
but
that's stupid.
That doesn't work. But if you do it by genre,
it's a bygone vestige of a bygone era.
And if you do it by genre, it creates just as many problems because then you're like, well, does this game belong in action or adventure? Or is it shooter?
Yeah, action
or do we do action adventure? Do we do puzzle? Like, that shit doesn't work either.
Let me explain.
And then no one would break things up like that anyway. You can't imagine, like, what other field would you look at games and say, or other media and say, oh, well, I'm going to vote on this because it's this genre or whatever.
Okay, so Corvus, I saw you nodding your head.
Well, I mean, they're essentially saying it's an impossible task, right? They're saying that there is no way to take all of these diverse games and sort of compare them. You just can't do it. So better to just discuss each game as it's on its own individual merits and talk about what it does well, and go ahead and make it a popularity contest among the people who play them for the selection of which games you talk about. So now we're not talking about awards. We're talking about saying we're going to take the games that had the most impact among people who listen to our podcast. So we're going to narrow down our community to people who listen to our podcast. We're going to get them to sort of poll and say what they like best, and then we'll just talk about the strengths of those games. And I think that's awesome. I think that's the way to sort of intelligently and rationally assess quality. It doesn't need to be relative to other games. Each game should stand up to its own measure in a way.
So the reason I put these clips back to back with the JonTron Game Grump clips is that it sounds like we're facing the same issue just from another angle. And where they had a problem with indefinable qualities, right here we're looking at potential ways to break down the issue and just look at it from any angle. Whether it's the best angle is another question. But it seems even in these We Can Confirm clips that they are hesitant to take that first step. They don't want to do it by platform, which is kind of silly in my opinion, but it is one way to do it. And they don't want to do it by genre. And I think the reason Garnett said that wouldn't work is because there are some games that seem to fit in multiple genre. And I think that particular issue sits on top of the issue of, well, we have a long history of not defining things properly in the first place. So I know with myself, I can define genres very specifically so that I know exactly what falls in and out of it and where the gray area is. But if you haven't done that work, then trying to make awards or create a criteria using that vague system is completely absurd. And I think
Garnett inherently recognizes that. Whether or not he knows the problem has to do with his language and criteria system way back before the awards even started.
I've always said that genre is not an accurate measure of a game. Like you can't, genre and a game really it's hardly applicable. I think it's a mislabeled term, in fact. Genre is a great marketing tool, however, so it's a great way to sort of give somebody a vague, rough idea of the sort of gameplay experience they're going to have. But it's not, when you sit down to design a game, you're designing compelling gameplay, or you should be designing with an idea of what your audience is going to experience, like what their engagement is going to be. The genre comes later when they need to put something on the box. So I think it's really valid. I think that you can't do it by genre. You certainly can't do it by platform, because am I going to be comparing Puzzle Quest 2 to Medal of Honor on the Xbox? You know, I mean, like, so yeah, platform clearly doesn't make any sense either.
Yeah, I guess it also has to do with the way you present it. I mean, because ultimately the best end of year lists are just a way for people to present their reflections on the past year, which is, natural to do, a natural time of the year to reflect on the sorts of the experiences you've had. But I guess the reason it becomes a problem is because, I don't know if this is Garnett's problem, but the reason it usually becomes a problem is, and you start feeling guilt for comparing different games together, really has to do when you present it as the best games of the year, as opposed to a reflection on the games you played during the past year. And the ones that are worthy of reflection will make it to your final article. The ones that aren't won't. But once you assume the impossible responsibility of comparing Puzzle Quest, versus a more complex or 3D game that somehow pushes, your expectations of graphic progression in video games or something. I mean, that's when the issue comes. So in a way, it's a self-made problem, I guess.
This sounds really cynical, but I said this last week, and the more I thought about it after the show, I was like, yeah, that's actually probably a pretty decent methodology, is to break it down by MSRP. And basically be like, look, all the $15 games, you guys are getting compared against each other. All the $30 games, you guys are getting compared against each other. And yeah, you can have
it's so commercial.
But an episodic game,
it is on
against. The Walking Dead wouldn't have anything to compete against. It's episodic.
Well, okay.
I'm just saying,
you would have
there are flaws.
There would be, yeah. It's not but there is no. But what I'm saying is you have expectations when you throw down a certain amount of a chunk of change for a game, depending on how much it costs, whether it's a $60 box game or a $15 downloadable or whatever. Your expectations are already set to a certain degree. Now you may get a game.
That's fair.
You may get a game that's like, holy crap, this is worth way more to me than $15, or holy crap, I can't believe I paid $60 for this, but. It's the only common denominator across the industry, the only common segmentation sort of criteria.
What were you going to say, Jeff?
I don't think that's a bad idea, but let me present, rather than a solution, let me present
a problem,
a philosophy.
Okay.
A falafel.
A falafel. Let me present some food for thought. What if the question that we ask ourselves in trying to solve this problem isn't, what's the best way? What's the fairest way? What if we ask ourselves, what way is most fun?
I like that.
Because what's the point of doing a best of the year? The whole point is to create some sort of fun result, right? Which is why best categories and best platform, all that's bullshit, because that's not answering the fun question.
Well,
What's the fun question? What's the fun question? The fun question that is answered by best of lists is, in your opinion, which did you like the most?
Right.
Right?
Yes.
So that's the juicy, fun question is, what was number one in your mind?
But I think we also want to recognize the excellence that's been created in our field, or in the field, right? In the field of video games. You want to recognize these great contributions to the history of video games.
Sure.
Because it's just like
that's
film
your
or
goal,
music or anything
then
else.
the categories we have now kind of fill that.
But I don't think that's the thing. I don't think
what if your
style.
category is best contribution to the video game medium?
That's interesting. I like that.
But how
But then Journey would ruin that, because Journey would win that.
Why is that ruining it?
Not
That's
ru-
called winning it.
Not ruining it, but it wouldn't be a competition for any other game.
Well, that's because there's a clear winner. That's awesome.
Yeah, but I just don't know
That's
if
like
that's
saying-
the best category name. Because I feel like if from 2012, not one game made an impact.
What?
In that category, you're saying artistically, which one game is historically affecting
Well,
video games?
you inserted the word artistically. I didn't say that.
What
I
was the
said
question?
which had the biggest impact on the medium.
Oh, well, then I wouldn't say Journey for that one.
Well, you could.
Yeah, you could, absolutely.
Because now we're having the fun discussion now.
Kind of thing.
Well, and they're all experience based, right? So if you say what's the best villain, it's like, why is that the best villain? Well, because I hated him, or because he scared the crap out of me, or whatever. And it's like it gets down to why you liked the game in the first place.
And I think in the discussion, he said it too very clearly at the end. No matter what criteria you pick and how you decide to break something down, we're really after the fun discussion or the important discussion of why you like something. And in his, I think that was Billy Berghammer or Jeff Mattis. In his discussion, he said, if you pick best villain, why did you think he was the best? How did he move you? What happened in the game that made you feel that way? And that's why I think the core of this entire issue of expression and understanding what other people think and being able to express what you think is completely made or broken by how your language is. And if you have the words to break things down, especially objectively, you can start to compare things and understand more of the complex process that you have forming your own opinion when you experience it for the first time, when you experience anything for the first time. So I think it's a language issue at the core.
But then this is interesting. It says that I think a good barometer for sorting games in general might be how much data they use, the amount of sound or the resolution of art assets.
Discussion there.
Best
How
use
much
of
data they use.
No, but if you
They
think
did from
about
Star
it,
Trek.
what he's
Best
saying,
gigabyte in a game.
no, if you use that as a categorization tool, like the taxonomy of games would then be divided by how big are the resources for this game. Is this a game that
How
has
much money went into it? That's fair. But that
to a
kind
degree,
of
that's what
AAA.
Although if you were a small team and labored at it for forever, you could get to be a giant game. But I'm just, it's be like something like an Assassin's Creed or a Far Cry 3 has these huge amounts of art assets and music and animation and all this stuff that went into it, versus a Journey that has a much smaller
footprint.
Yeah.
See when.
But then this is interesting. It says that I think a good barometer for sorting games in general might be how much data they use, the amount of sound or the resolution of art assets.
Discussion there.
Best
How
use
much
of
data they use.
No, but if you
They
think
did from
about
Star
it,
Trek.
what he's
Best
saying,
gigabyte in a game.
no, if you use that as a categorization tool, like the taxonomy of games would then be divided by how big are the resources for this game. Is this a game that
How
has
much money went into it? That's fair. But that
to a
kind
degree,
of
that's what
AAA.
Although if you were a small team and labored at it for forever, you could get to be a giant game. But I'm just, it's be like something like an Assassin's Creed or a Far Cry 3 has these huge amounts of art assets and music and animation and all this stuff that went into it, versus a Journey that has a much smaller
footprint.
Yeah.
See when.
How about the criteria about the amount of data the game has?
I thought I think some of those suggestions were absolutely ridiculous. The amount of data, like yeah, I thought of Dyad when I first heard that. And of course Sean McGrath made Dyad, the guy I interviewed for episode 1. And he made Dyad in 1080p, and since a lot of the visuals were produced procedurally, he did a lot with sound, and he used uncompressed audio to make the thing a gig. Like the total file size was 1337 megabytes, to spell elite, and he did that intentionally. But that's a huge file size for something that practically has no art assets. So at any point, you can take any game and make its gigabyte footprint much higher, much lower. You can compress it. You can put it on a 3DS. You can do whatever. I think that criteria doesn't mean anything for the reason why we play games. We don't play games because of their gigage. We play it because of
their interactivity, their forms, and what we can actually perceive. So,
This episode of Idle Thumbs is brought to you by the Phaedrus Group.
Games, video 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 games.
We have to first, to tackle this question, we have to accept that the words that we use matter. And I do think the word game and video game matters. When you hear it, it has charge and meaning. So yes, no matter whether it's a good thing or a bad thing, I think it affects people's interpretation of it being something they want or not.
Yeah. But the BBC World Book Club, hosted by Harriet Gilbert, and Bookworm, hosted by Michael Silverblatt, they're both writers. They talk to authors on every episode, and they're just fantastic. I mean, they're very low key. It's nothing like Idle Thumbs. It's authors, because their craft is entirely about assembling words in insightful, interesting, eloquent, and elegant ways. They're good at speaking too, quite frequently, and I find that makes them particularly good for this kind of thing, which is an insight into process and craft.
Mm-hmm.
They're good at phrasing those things, whereas in some cases, musicians and filmmakers are not necessarily always quite so adept at that, or game developers. It doesn't mean they aren't smart and have good things to say, but I find writers are often better at just putting those things concretely. So I love those podcasts, and I listen to them religiously, and I've gotten a huge amount of valuable insight out of them, and I would recommend them to just people doing creative work in general.
And this last clip that you just heard was from the Idle Thumbs podcast, and you could hear the Idle Thumbs crew sort of talking about the importance of words and how important it is that to understand that these words mean something to people, and understanding words better is a better way of getting down to the bottom of why people react to video games and what they expect in the first place. But the second part of the clip in particular I found interesting because Chris Remo suggested or put out the idea that writers are particularly good at expressing themselves and their ideas because they deal in the world of words. Often they live in that world and they do all their work there, so they're particularly good at expressing themselves in words. And in general, maybe the work that I do in critical gaming is in fact comes from a lot of my writer background, where I really want to express things very clearly in words because I think that's a great place to start. And maybe it kind of helps me understand and give a little less pressure on other people to be able to articulate themselves because, one, I know how hard it is, and two, I'm particularly bent towards writing. I'm bent towards explaining things in words. And the last part of that clip I found interesting because he suggested that people listen to these two podcasts about writing for anyone doing creative work in general, and that's sort of the same idea I put out with Critical Cast Episode 2, Expression, because I said no matter if you're making video games or writing music or anything creative, understanding these concepts will help you in whatever field you're working in.
Smooth.
Boiled it right down. Smooth closing.
Smoothed it right out. Right?
Yeah, and I think that's kind of a problem. There's two problems. There's the hyper definition of what a game. There's the hyper definition of what a game is, and then there's sort of the. Whenever you try to say, thousands of years into the future, 100 years into the future, it's just that you're generally going down a bad path. I think just an incorrect path.
Well, I mean, so he's comparing
Because
it to the prior thousands of years of human history.
Where the video games didn't exist.
Well, when he doesn't separate video games from games.
Oh, okay.
Right. So it's
games starting as a sport, as competition.
Right.
Yeah,
Understood.
and board games and chess and everything else. It was always the thing that I think is I don't know, inherently stupid about it is like the computer is a simulation of a competitor. Done, right? Like there was no single player game before because we didn't have something that could simulate the other player in a game until computers could do that.
Well, also so much of video games it also falls under the umbrella of make believe, where you're sort of just a person. Like your game, for instance, Gone Home, you were just a person embodying what it feels like to be in this space and imagining you're in this person's home.
Yeah. Well, that is the place where I think
so much of being alive is about.
But that's not what a game is, and that's
playing
the place where
in
I
the
think
woods
the
and
definition
imagining you're Indiana Jones.
I think
or something like that.
I think the definition of game does get uncomfortable when you stretch it out to be about a place and about an experience more than about interacting with a set of rules and consequences.
Like, but at that point, I would ask, like, how do like tabletop role playing games fit into that? Like, the game master may not always be in direct competition with the players, but they are playing the same role as the game designer of a single player campaign. Is playing. Right?
I know it's tough.
I mean,
and that's why I don't really care to narrow my definition down. But like,
I mean, I think it's. I don't think it's a stupid point. It's not one that I agree with, but I think it's interesting. Like, I think it's an interesting thing to discuss. Like, I mean, I think what it points to is just a difference in. I think he has just a stricter interpretation of game, like sort of Jake. I think what you were getting at, and
Yeah, well, I think in a way, I don't think it's. I think it's definitely important to recognize that behind any discussion about any game, what you're essentially discussing is what a game is, right? What a game is to you. So in a way, it's good maybe to have that discussion about what is a game before you discuss any particular game, but not necessarily because you need to reach an agreement of what a game is, but because you need to understand that whatever you're going to say about the following games you're going to discuss is essentially a way for you to continue expressing a point of view. So you discuss what you think a video game is, mostly as a way of adding support to your perspective on the medium as a whole.
If you remember from the We Can Confirm clip, Garnet Lee opened with, how can we compare The Walking Dead, Journey, and Assassin's Creed? And that there is such a variety of experiences for these things that we call video games. And if you take what these Idle Thumb podcasters just said, some of these gaming examples don't quite fall into the same circle of video game, which is interacting with the system of rules with goals and challenges as much as the others do. And clearly, I think the spectrum goes Walking Dead, Journey, and then Assassin's Creed being the most game-like.
Exactly. That's one reason why I'm a big advocate, and we may disagree on this, I'm not sure, of writing video game as a single word. Because in part, I do fear a little bit that trap when you start seeing it literally just as a game and you start using examples of, well, where's the rules? Where's the challenge? Where's the goal? That, to me, in a way, if we're going to talk about how words matter, in a way, separating the word video from game, in a way, invites that kind of misunderstanding.
It implies a subcategory?
Because it exactly. It conceives it as a subcategory of games in general, as opposed to a new medium.
Just a quick hitter, how your experiences make up your background. When they're struggling with the definition of games, they felt that old tabletop games with Dungeon Masters should definitely fit in the definition of a game. Well, I don't come from that background, and me coming from a strict definition of the term game, I wouldn't mind tabletop games not being included in a strict definition of games and gameplay. But them coming from a different background, they would need that to fit in. So the words and their definitions are going to skew and change depending on what they feel need to be in that category or not.
I've noticed that too. I had a conversation last GDC, and it was like a 30-minute to an hour conversation just trying to figure out what the definition of game is and what falls inside and outside of it. And I think a lot of people think if you define game and what they think of a game falls outside of it, that all of a sudden they're on a losing end of an argument. But I think whenever you make a definition, like Jose was saying, it just really sets the conversation up for clear communication. Not necessarily we're going to take this to the video game hierarchy and this is going to be
this law is going to be handed down to everybody, and we all have to abide by it. And I think for that reason, when you're making a definition, it needs to be as strict as like defining and narrowing as possible, so that we can narrow down a small group and look at it very clearly. Because it doesn't really do us very much good to have a lot of vague, overlapping, broad definitions. If you're going to go out of your way to make a definition, then you should make it have some explanatory power, have some divisive power.
So I'm gonna actually probably argue against that a little bit. I hear what you're saying, and I can see that there can be value in that. But I see a lot of people trying to define game based on criteria of personal preference. So they say, these are the games I enjoy. These are the games I personally consider real games. So I'm going to define game as being these things I like, and all the rest of you are stupid. And to my mind, what we need is a really cogent definition of game that encompasses all of the game experiences. And I do agree that it should go back throughout human history and address what we have always considered games, because games play a really important role in our culture. And I don't think that video games should be given a free pass to avoid fulfilling that same role, because I think they're a really powerful medium when they're used as games have always traditionally been used. Mm-hmm. So like, I have a personal definition of games that I use. I don't expect anyone else to use it, but I do my best to make sure that my game explains why such a broad variety of things are valid games. Mm-hmm. Not rule out things that I don't personally like to play.
A lot of single-player games are only barely games. It doesn't mean they're not good things, but like, depending on how strict you are about an actual like game system being employed, like a lot of them are quite thin in that respect. Like they're essentially weird, just kind of lightly reactive like environments. I don't know. It doesn't mean that they shouldn't exist.
I feel like that when things that are very far down that spectrum are actually really rare. You know, like. I don't know, like any single player game in which you are trying to succeed, the game is trying to keep you from succeeding, right? Like the game is your competitor in this set of challenges.
But it wants you to get to the end of it, though. Like it wants, like,
does it?
Yeah, it absolutely does. It has auto saves. It has checkpoints.
Yeah, I'm thinking about Mario right now. I was thinking about like Mario 3 or whatever. You know, it's like
but they don't want you to stop playing when you die.
No, but they also do want to.
It wants to impede you until your skill at besting it increases to the point that you can.
Right.
Right.
I mean,
That's the same. Like, different from what it.
Would you call a crossword puzzle a game?
No, it's a puzzle.
So then you could basically say a single player game is a puzzle.
I think it's a lot of single player games I think are much closer to puzzles.
Like that's interesting.
Yeah, that's kind
of well. I mean, so maybe that's a thing. I mean, maybe that's a fair semantic argument.
I have a thing. There's a
so XCOM is a puzzle.
No, XCOM's definitely a lot closer to a game. Like XCOM will just let you lose. Like you can just straight up lose a campaign.
But
of
you
XCOM.
can fall into a monster's mouth in Mario.
A big fish can eat you, and then small fish run out of lives.
You can, I guess, eventually run out of lives.
Like
but I mean, isn't that like semantically the exact same?
I don't think it's the same as quite the same as XCOM. I mean, it's obviously all on a continuum, right? Like none of this is like hard black and white. I think it's different.
Good job, Colin.
Because XCOM. Yeah, no kidding. In Mario, what happens is you just hit a like hard. Now your character's dead. Like you arbitrarily at some point had more or fewer lives based on how well you've done up to this point. Like so, there is a bit of that attrition. XCOM is a little bit different in that you actually make decisions that like ripple forward for a long time, and so there's this entire like complex system of like variables and. Like forces.
But aren't you kind of arguing that complexity changes the definition?
I think it kind of does to some degree.
But I mean, in Mario, you can save your P-Wing. That's a choice you're going to make that's going to affect you later in the game. Puzzle. Like, it's like, how are those things actually, like...
I'm a bad person in that I think... Oh, go ahead. You're going to answer that question.
I'm just going to...
I was going to talk about how I'm a bad person.
One of the things I'll say about this is that I haven't...
Jake doesn't want us to stop thinking about that for too long.
I'm thinking this through literally as it's coming out of my mouth. So, like, I'm very much opening up myself the ability to get talked into a corner because I haven't thought this through well enough to, like, robustly argue.
This feels like an exploration, by the way. It doesn't feel like we're debating.
Yeah. No, I'm just
It's not like a game.
Because
not like a puzzle.
Because most of the reason I'm arguing is because I think this is interesting, not because I'm like strenuously defending Koster in this, right? Like, I think it's an interesting thing to discuss, though.
Between the Game Grumps and the We Can Confirm clips, I think the Idle Thumb podcast crew gives tackling these issues of what games are and how we understand them the best shot. But the one thing I did want to point out about these clips is that when you don't have a clear language that's defined in words and in clear terms, the way most people go about defining things is by jumping from example to example. And as you can see from the clips that I selected, this gets pretty complicated pretty quickly. And it can get really hard to sort out where you are in the conversation and where you're going. And that's just something that commonly happens when people try to tackle such issues. But I just thought that was very interesting. And the last clip that I have for this B-side of Critical Cast Episode 2 Expression is from a YouTube channel that advertises a graphic design school that is really good. I really enjoy this YouTube channel. And the guy you're going to hear is talking about doing some graphic design work, basically drawing pictures with digital ink and making a lot of concept art for big companies. So take a listen to this.
Hey everybody, and welcome to episode 59 of Design Cinema. This is Feng Zhu speaking, and this episode is called Before and After. And this is what makes teaching fun. You know, when we see students come in drawing like this, we know they're frustrated, they have ideas, they want to do cool stuff, but yet they cannot. They cannot make it come out. So when you see students start reaching this, now their ideas starts to come out, they have a huge boost of confidence. It's great to see. So this is the important part. And once you know how to draw basic forms, you could break it into very complex forms. So instead of drawing the same thing over and over and over and over again, like you see here, you draw it once, you draw it one time, and you should look pretty good because you're building all these core fundamentals into this drawing. And this is the kind of stuff that you can start showing your clients, and they won't think that you are an amateur. And that's the whole point of having this kind of proper education, to know what are the steps, so you're not working in the blind. You know, you're not guessing, but knowing exactly, because all this kind of stuff, there's a formula to it, right? And formula is not good for, you know, long-term usage, obviously, because we're designers, we want to break that. But for a student, you have to know how to do things the right way before you start messing around with your own way of doing things, right? So because this business, we're at the end of the day talking about design here, we're talking about making a product, and there's a certain type of pipeline that goes with making products. And especially when it comes to entertainment products like movies and games, there are certain things you just don't break the rules for, because it has to do with science, it has to do with the way our eyes and our brains work. So there are just some fundamental stuff that you have to follow. But unless someone tells you what those are, it's very hard to figure it out. So you're just drawing by eye. It takes forever to figure things out. So in this case, I'm just following a very specific way of doing production paintings.
So there are just a few things that I wanted to point out in the clips that you just heard, and that at the beginning, it was described that the students that come in that have ideas and the students who can't express them, that they're pretty frustrated. But once they go through the school and they get the education that they're looking for, they get a huge confidence boost. And that's something that I can also speak to from direct experience, where once you learn the fundamentals and once you learn how to express yourselves, you'll have a lot of confidence in both who you are, because you learn a lot in that process, and how you can communicate to others. And it was also mentioned that the basics help you express complex things. So you never have to worry about the complex results you're trying to create in the end. You just need to focus as a beginning student, especially on the fundamentals or the basics. And that is the proper education that he offers at the school. Another thing that he mentioned is that you go through these proper education, you do all the hard work learning these fundamentals, because it takes out the guessing and it takes out the blind work involved in trying to express yourself in a medium, because of course all these mediums are pretty complex and you can't just luck your way into the expression that you want to ultimately deliver very easily. And he said there's a formula to learn, and a lot of these formulas are based on science, so it's very important to learn these things clearly up front. It's very hard to learn them on your own, because it's a lot of particular details that you may appreciate intuitively, but that doesn't mean you can turn around and use these rules and these lessons when you're trying to make your own work. And that's why learning these rules explicitly is very important. But to close this podcast, I wanted to say that you don't have to be afraid of losing that indefinable quality. You don't have to be afraid of losing the magic in what you enjoy, like you heard in the Game Grumps. And you also don't have to stress out about creating a criteria. Just start somewhere and keep tweaking as you go along, because it's a learning process and you're never going to get it right the first time through. So don't be exactly like you heard on the We Can Confirm clips. And though it's hard to get to the bottom of some of the concepts, if you jump back and forth from example to example, you might get tangled up in a never-ending referential war. So I just caution you on that. But ultimately, it's a lot of hard work to learn how to express yourself. And the best part is, a lot of this hard work is done by people like me, who have worked out the language and the lessons and the tools, and who are more than willing to help you get to the level of expression that you want, help answer your questions, and point you in the right direction. And it seems that every craft expert that I find reiterates these concepts, and that is the closing idea I want to leave you with. So for the quick credits, I want to thank the Game Grumps show, the We Can Confirm show, the Idle Thumbs show, and 2 clips on cassette tapes that I played at the beginning of this episode. The first show was from a YouTube video called Will Cassette Tapes Make a Comeback? And the second was Cassette, a documentary for a Kickstarter trailer. And I also want to thank the FZD School, episode 59 before and after, for the clips that you heard at the end. I want to thank Corvus, Jose, and Marcus for participating in this podcast, and thank you for listening. There was a little bit more to the discussion that I had to cut, but I'm looking forward to digging into these issues at a later date. So that's all I have for you on this digital B-side of Critical Cast episode 2 on expression. And I've always wanted to say this: I'll catch you on the flip side.